Stomp.
You're listening to 1232, an audio epic, produced by Rumblestump Entertainment. Chapter 14. Somewhere in the mountains, the dawn reached her pink and gray fingers from the sky, resting on the canopies of leaves. Underneath their waving branches, a weary man climbed upward, ever upward, along the path beside a rushing stream. He carried nothing but a sword and kept his chin up, looking ahead, but his shoulders drooped and his feet scuffed over the rough ground. At last, he stopped, for the light touched the earth in a patch of sunshine over the brook. His muddy, torn clothes were even more unbecoming in the young daylight. Quickly, he scooped up handfuls of water, bringing it to his bearded mouth with the energy of thirst. His thirst quenched, he stopped, still kneeling, to rest. He stared at the rushing cold water with luminous blue eyes, as if drinking it in. Rousing himself, he pushed on. A hawk circled high in the morning air, diving to the forest canopy, its eerie cry echoing from rock to rock. Unaware, he took in the scene with his clear, shining eyes. The wind rushed over the trees, brushing their tops and swaying their trunks. He tried to suck it into his lungs, as if this would fill him with its life. Wearily, he turned to go on. Passing under a large boulder, he paused. Something wasn't right. He was ambushed, his head covered with a hood and his arms bound. He didn't possess the strength to resist, since the climb had taken all his energy. They drug him further up the trail and along a narrow ledge, at last coming to a great hole in the mountainside. They entered the cave and sat him down. Through the entrance, sunlight was bursting in, the rest of the cave lit by dim little candles.
Remove the hood.
The voice from an approaching shadow was strangely familiar to the captive. He sat facing the light. A massive silhouette blocked the sun from his face, but he couldn't discern the features of the face from the hard shadows. He sat with the men pressing down on his shoulders and his hands tied fast behind his back. He shot a defiant look at the shadowed face. He would not be a willing prisoner.
Untie him. This is Cardigan. How came you to your freedom, sire?
The shadow bent his head in reverent greeting, and Cardigan caught the light glimmer of a jolly smile and tearfully twinkling eyes. Cardigan rose to his feet, but staggered.
Fetch him meat and wine,
the man commanded. Then he took Cardigan's arm and sat him back down in the chair.
You need strength, my prince.
It is you. No one else would address me as prince.
Cardigan searched the face.
Indeed, sire. It is I, your old tutor.
Priest Michael's deep voice, though steady, was thick with emotion.
Sire, you need rest.
The priest suggested as Cardigan settled into his chair.
My dear friend, rest while you run and run while you rest. There's little time to waste. We must hasten with our tales and act. You must tell me all that has happened to you while I eat. Let me regale you, meanwhile, with the tale of my escape.
Cardigan leaned forward, resting his arms on the wooden table before him. Priest Michael half sat on the table. His wild silver and black hair took on an ethereal glow in the diminished light.
I was below in the tunnels in a cell. Daily I was given some food and water, and daily for the first year, I destroyed myself with anguish. I was like Job, who had lost everything. But slowly, the strength of my God returned to me. I was greatly humbled. Though I intend to fight for the people, I now do so for the honor of my heavenly king. For it is he I serve before all others.
The priest slowly nodded, and Cardigan took a deep breath before saying,
Many hours alone in prayer have given me the sight, a way by which I can see what other men cannot. My ears can discern a voice that perhaps others are deaf to. It was revealed to me upon meditation on the scriptures that you, my old friend, had forced us to commit to memory that deliverance would come to me.
Cardigan paused and drew in another deep breath.
Another year and God delivered me. You wouldn't believe it, Father, but after those years of melancholy, who should be imprisoned in the cell next to mine but a few days ago? The children of Brother John came by the miraculous power of God. They possessed a tool which they used for a key. I left them with Caryn and came in search of who might be left loyal to the cause.
One woodsman set a roasted leg of mutton in front of him and a cup of wine. He tore into it without hesitation and motioned for the priest to tell his story.
Your story is almost as bizarre as mine, my son. As you know, I was commanded to leave my order almost 2 years ago. I regret having to leave you and your brother, but I traveled north along the seacoast, called ever onward. On my journey, I encountered a man who had been waylaid and beaten, and found myself challenged to practice what I have so long preached. The man was a pagan, but I carried him to shelter, where, for several months, I did my best to revive him. You see, he was robbed of his memory. Being an outcast man myself, I did not know if he was hunted as well. And so, deep into the mountains of Snowdonia, we sought refuge, and each day he gained strength, but his memory never returned. At last he asked me why I had taken him off the road, and I told him that Christ was the one who had took him off the road, bound his wounds, and nursed him night and day.
The priest stopped and smiled. A raspy chuckle overtook him for a moment before he continued.
I named him Enoch, for since he recognized the Lord, he has walked with him ever since, and will, I believe, for the rest of his life.
Cardigan looked at the priest as he continued his story, amazed that the kind monk had not changed. He still spoke so directly, but with the warmest of voices and the kindest of gazes. He was perhaps the most blunt but loving person Cardigan had ever known. Priest Michael continued his narrative.
When Enoch was on his feet again, we parted. I wandered more until I heard that a Norman lord had marched all the way to Brecon and given Zorreale the power of arms, and you had been imprisoned by the black sorceress herself. I knew you and your brother would need help, for I was certain you would resist her. When I arrived and found your brother had vanished and you imprisoned, it grieved me greatly.
Cardigan's face changed at the mention of his brother. He would need to explain to the priest some other time what became of Lachlan. The priest ended on a jolly note.
But I have prayed for your swift release, by miracle, if the Lord deemed it necessary. It seems his mysterious ways marvel us all yet again.
Cardigan stood to embrace him, but the priest slowly withdrew.
Oh, Cardigan, my boy, forgive me. You need clothes, and to bathe. Oof. I will retrieve your sword. We've been looking after it for you.
Priest Michael promptly left the cave, leaving Cardigan looking down and smelling his shirt. The very next moment, two energetic young men bounded in.
Oi, there he is!
Pointing to Cardigan as they merrily approached him.
What's this I hear about a Duncan? Oh my, yes. It looks a necessity this time, friend.
The other said as he wrapped Cardigan in a bear hug, quickly releasing him and waving his hand in front of his nose.
Smith, Ed.
The young Welsh lord was overjoyed to be reunited with his oldest friends. He patted them on the back and took their hands heartily. Ed took Cardigan's beard in his hand, tugging on it.
This is new.
You need more than a Duncan, boy. You need a shearing.
Smith, notorious for a booming voice, filled the cave with loud laughter.
Ah, you are alive. We feared it would be so. Had to delay the honor of dying for your country just yet, did you? Well, we're the better off. Our jester has returned.
Edward clapped Cardigan on the back, then recoiled and covered his nose.
But no jokes until you've been laundered. What sort of habits do they teach prisoners these days?
Laughing loudly and joking, they all walked out of the cave into the bright sunlight.
Hey, psst, real quick. Let's hear a word from our awesome sponsors who make this show possible. Then we'll get back to the episode.
This episode of 1232 is sponsored in part by Oasis Family Media and its family of companies including Oasis Audio, Enclave Publishing, and Sky Turtle Press. Publishers of the forthcoming epic Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, rendered in modern prose by Rebecca K. Reynolds and illustrated by Justin Gerard. For more information, visit fairyqueen.com. That's fairyqueen.com, or find the link in the description below. 1232 is brought to you by Rumble Stump Entertainment, owned and operated by me, Jet, and my wife, Callie Sioux. We love what we do, but each of these episodes requires a ton of work. Although they're awesomely fun to create, each one requires about 300 hours of work from us and our talented team members. So, if you find what we are doing valuable, support us on patreon.com by subscribing to Rumble Stump. Link in the description below. Thank you for supporting the arts.
Let's see. Where did we leave off?
By firelight that evening, the ragtag resistance set up a meager banquet in a clearing under the trees. A long table made of planks laid over boulders served the rabble their meat. They were glad their leader had returned, though their number was diminished. Since Cardigan's imprisonment, 2/3 of them had been killed. Now there were only 30 fighting men. Some of their families had fled to the camp too, but they were ragged and hungry. These few, under Priest Michael, kept the resistance alive. They had a network of support in the Brecon countryside, but Zorreale's Black Riders were a constant threat. The Black Riders rode under Ragar, an unknown Danish mercenary who had joined forces with Zorreale. Their numbers grew steadily. She promised them knighthood and land if they served her, and in these hard times, it was easy to get men of low character to agree to her terms. She pardoned all who informed on the rebels, though her pardon was of little value, for she now demanded a burdensome tribute from the whole shire. To refuse to pay tribute, or to offer less than what was demanded, was considered sedition, land and property confiscated, and slavery resulted. Thus, Cardigan returned to find the cause all but lost. Those who had not been killed resisting were held as slaves and locked inside Castle Brecon's wooden walls. Even rumors of them working underground in the mountains were circulated. Ranks swelling from facing the dire prospect of slavery, the Black Riders were over 200 strong. Now, this hapless collection of rebels had spent themselves in resisting such odds, but it had been more than a year since hope had shined on them. Few victories and many losses. But tonight, they were merry, for with Cardigan, hope returned. He sat at the head of the table with Ed, Smith, and others he knew closest to him, all talking loud and eating their fill of fowl and venison.
A toast
Smith stood and thundered down the table, raising his cup high.
to baths and new clothes, for they have made his return bearable.
Raucous laughter followed, and the table erupted with banging and clanging. Cardigan laughed most of all. He and his brother were born the sons of Llewellyn the Great. Lachlan's mother died when he was born. The grieving Llewellyn then married the granddaughter of a mysterious noblewoman, rumored to have descended from a hermitess. But not just any hermitess, but one tied to the ancient line of Arthur, King of the Britons. Many had said Cardigan had a right to rule all of Wales by birth, being the son of such a lady. But he didn't aspire to it. He couldn't seem to run from his imposed destiny, however, and Brecknockshire became his responsibility. It seemed somehow he always ended up leading the way. The weight of such a bloodline, so engraved in his being, flowed from him. Many, however, resented his detachment to leadership, claiming his heritage would prove to be the only way to unite Brecon, to drive out the opportunistic power seekers, Zorreale and Ragar. He now sat at the end of the table, clean-shaven, in good clothes, his sandy hair cut above his ears. He looked down the row of his friends and followers. In their eyes, hope was rising as they glanced at him. Their joy filled his heart, and so did that of the voice he heard in his cell, the second sight, the promise. He rose from the table to speak, but seeing his voice couldn't carry above the din, he stepped up on the feasting planks.
Hail, friends. I have but one request to make of you, that we boldly approach the throne of grace, bringing to our Father in heaven the fullness of our joy tonight. I declare this a time of heartfelt thanksgiving, for it was He who kept me alive in that hole, and it is He who will strengthen us and make us victorious. Thank Him now as you please in your particular manner. When we have expressed to Almighty God our thanks, then we shall counsel what we are to do.
He hopped down, looking earnestly into the faces of his friends. He clasped the forearms of Ed and Smith on either side, and they bowed their heads. Up from the forest clearing, through the gentle firelight and into the clear night sky rose the throbbing murmur of their prayers, like a low song. After a while, a young woman took up her lyre and played a tune, another a drum, and the rest of them danced around the clearing, smiling and laughing. But Cardigan, Ed, Smith, and a few others remained at the table long after the celebration ended.
Now to the task before us. Where is Brother John? His counsel would be of significant benefit, and his children would be overjoyed to see him.
Cardigan asked Edward, who was getting ready to arm wrestle Smith. Ed and Smith stopped what they were doing. They were all quiet for a moment.
Did Caryn not tell you of Brother John?
I was only with her long enough to find that I could spare no time in coming here. What news of Brother John?
Cardigan's face darkened. Ed looked at Smith, who nodded back at him.
Cardigan, Brother John was martyred only a few days ago, before your escape. It was all part of her plan. She got to Hoffman, as you know, in those early days. His betrayal led to your capture, and he almost took the life of Brother John. But young Scarlet saved him with a well-planted arrow in his arm. Brother John stayed in hiding, assisting us and continuing to copy the scriptures onto parchment.
Edward cleared his throat, his eyes downcast.
A mob, led by Hoffman, demanded he recant his preaching and stop printing the scriptures in our tongue. He would not. After that, the people scattered in fear of one another. No longer did they meet to read the scriptures and pray, for fear their neighbors would do to them what was done to Brother John.
Ed wasn't finished, but he stopped to be sure Cardigan would bear the news well. Cardigan's muscular jaw tightened. He looked at Ed and nodded for him to continue.
Brother John's death was used by God to help many decide their eternal destiny. Yes, he won many to his kingdom that day. We have lost others, whom we will dearly miss as well. The miller was killed in the raid, with Smith's father.
Cardigan held up his hand and interrupted.
What raid are you speaking of?
Ed took a deep breath before going on.
More than half the God-fearing citizens of Brecon town were slaughtered on one ill-fated day. Ragar called them together, claiming Zorreale's rule as queen of these lands. They refused to pay her new tribute. Minutes after he rode away, while the men were still in the square, the Black Riders came upon them. Not a man was left standing. They burned the tavern, the church, and the mill house.
Smith took over where Ed had stopped, too overcome to continue.
Caryn and the smithy gather supplies for us when we send for it. She cannot come herself, for it would be too great a risk, and the priest bade us tell you. He is fetching Brother John's children, for they are not safe with Caryn. He rode down to Brecon this very night.
He had answered the rest of Cardigan's questions in a flourish of words.
Smith, I join you in your grief. I know that feeling well.
Cardigan looked into his friend's eyes, both of their expressions like stone. All eyes were on Cardigan now, and a hush fell over them.
Young and old adventurers alike should know the importance of preventing new injuries and healing old ones. That's why 1232 is sponsored by Alpha and Omega Chiropractic, serving Ruidoso, New Mexico and the surrounding area. Whether you're seeking treatment for a new or reoccurring pain or are interested in preventative care, they are ready to work with you towards a healthier and happier you. Visit alphaandomegachiropractic.com for more information and schedule an appointment today. That's alphaandomegachiropractic.com. Do you like listening to your stories with less advertisements? I understand. Do you and the babushka and the kiddies want interruption-free show? Go to audio-epic.com to buy it. Ad-free, that's audio-epic.com for advertisement-free show. It's easy.
And now, back to the show.
The music, the laughter, and dancing were an eerie contrast to the news he had heard not minutes before. His eyes found the flickering candle flame in front of him, and he slowly leaned back in his chair, staring at it for a long time. Cardigan's eyes were aflame themselves with anger at the injustice done. He thought of the curly-haired redhead Rhona and her brother, Flint, and the despair they would go through, losing their father. Then of his people, who had suffered so much in his absence. At long last, he drew the knife from his belt and stabbed it into the table.
As long as we remain on the Lord's side, the victory is ours. We will win our freedom from this tyrant. Send this serpent back to the pit that spawned her.
A chorus of agreement went up from those gathered around. They had been beaten down in the previous days, and having their leader back, rekindled their patriotism. He reminded them of the reality that awaited them.
Now, friends, you know Ragar will have the Black Riders searching night and day when he finally discovers that I and Brother John's son and daughter have escaped. Caryn faces the most danger, but we cannot risk removing her from town without suspicion, as long as she and the blacksmith can remain undetected. But the riders will be all over the forest. Now.
He ducked his head low, his eyes glinting mischievously as he glanced from face to face.
I see this as an opportunity.
He laid his plan before them. Their forces were so small they could not array for battle. Between the lot of them, there were only 6 swords and 1 crossbow, and only 7 horses. Most of them fought with heavy clubs or pikes and slingshots, but a few were deadly with a longbow, the only drawback being the lack of good arrows. Only Ed had any armor, but he refused to wear it in solidarity with his peers. The Black Riders, however, each rode a fine, swift horse and carried a sword of steel, a shield, a crossbow, and a quiver of fine-tipped arrows. Each one also wore a black cloak, a tunic, and chainmail. A well-trained destrier would increase their chances of success. Cardigan was nearly finished.
And once we have the patrols split into 2s and 3s, we can easily ambush them, and...
Ha! We'll have horse and armor, every one to a man.
Ed blurted out, excited.
Nay, but that is not half the great advantage we shall gain.
Cardigan smiled wide.
We will have the element of surprise. For after we have captured this treasure, each man will array himself with it, and beguiling the others by his attire, ride as a patrol to lure further into the forest. By the end of the day, if the Lord smiles upon us, every rebel in Brecon will be equipped for battle. Our generous enemy will be powerless to take back her abundant gifts.
The table roared in laughter as the patient trees stood sentry-like over the clearing. Firelight playfully flickered up to the branches, rivaling only twinkling stars in the black velvet night. You've been listening to episode 14 of 1232, produced by Rumblestump Entertainment. Written by Callie, Sioux, and Cheyenne Bell. Narrated by Callie Sioux. Today's voice talents include Matt Burke as Cardigan, Sid Goodlow as Priest Michael, Mike Darling as Smith, and Garrett Goodlow as Edward. This episode was mixed and engineered by Jet Black, with editing and sound design by Casey Caballero Sounds. Music by Callie Sioux and Jet Black. Soon to be released by Rumblestump Entertainment. Mastered by Zach Bryant, 9 Moon Mastering. Cover art by Niall C. Grant. 1232 is made possible by our incredible and generous Kickstarter supporters. You know who you are. To our knights, our bards, our Welsh bowmen, wizards and chieftains, thank you. Continue the adventure in episode 15.